Hello, church. This is day 742 of our coronavirus lockdown. I don't know what day it is. Maybe it's 30 or 40. I don't know. I don't even know what day of the week it is. I think it is Tuesday, but it could also feel like a Thursday to me. Maybe a Monday. Definitely not a Sunday, but any other day is pretty much up in the air. And that's part of the reason that I'm speaking to you today about how do we deal with stress during these times. Last week, I gave a message about dealing with stress using some tips from what we know as the as family systems behavior, looking at how things work together, both if our relationships within organizations and also family. And today, this week, I want to talk some about stress and how we can deal with the stress, particularly of this experience of lockdown and of being probably staying at home with your kids and with your family. Looking at the stress of that, um, using the tools of the Enneagram, which I introduced to the church last year or this year. Again, I don't know. I don't know what year it is. But we're going to try doing this, and I'm going to try doing it with notes. Usually I like to write everything out so that I know exactly what I want to say. And now I'm just going to use some notes. Um, as we go along, you might recognize what number I am and why I like to have everything written out. But here we go. So the Enneagram is a system of looking at different personality types, but more than that, about how do we uh, grow and become mature people. But it looks at all people in terms of 9 different types. And so I'll tell you which number I'm going to talk about, and then there's a little kind of a little nickname that goes along with that, which may or may not strike you as accurate, but the more you live with the Enneagram, the more you see that it just works in life. It describes what reality is. So here we go. Stress, how do we deal with stress? And by using the Enneagram. So type number one is what we might, or what some people call the improvers. Some people call it perfectionists, and that seems a little bit um, kind of pejorative. And so along with some others, I like the term the improvers. And what the improvers want to do is make things better, make the world better, make themselves better, make others better. We need people like that because the world is not what it needs to be. And so improvers are really helpful. Um, each of these types also has kind of a default behavior that we fall back into in times of stress. And the improvers, the default behavior tends to be that um, they repress their anger. Anger is often an emotion, but improvers won't necessarily show that because they know that it's not right to show their anger, and so they'll kind of repress it. I like the term that sometimes in stress, improvers are like hall monitors. They're looking out for what's good behavior in themselves and in their children and in their spouse and in their colleagues and in their fellow church members and in their pastors. Good luck finding it there. But they're looking for what's the right behavior, and they want to reward that, and they definitely want to stop what they consider to be bad behavior. But also, what goes along with this, with stress and the improver, is that they have a pretty loud inner critic, someone who's telling them, this is what you have done wrong, this is what you're doing wrong. And dealing with that inner critic is an important thing for improvers to do. So in times of stress, like these times, being kind of sequestered at home, being unable to go through your normal habits and your normal behaviors, and being kept from what you really want to do, maybe for most people, is we fall back into that default behavior. And so with each one of these types, I want to kind of give 3 or so tips for how we might counter that stress, counter that default behavior to become the people that are compassionate, that are helpful, that are people who are good to be stuck in a house with. So for the improvers, tip number one would be when that inner critic gets going, is what you want to do is write down, here's what you hear that inner critic saying. Write down those words. And then I love this suggestion, is put them to music. Sing them to the words of Happy Birthday. I am too forgetful. I should have known that. You're not doing it right. I know better than you. Doing something silly like that helps to get out of that inner critic seriousness and laugh at yourself a little bit. Like we talked about last Sunday, that's an important thing. To see that inner critic as not as important, is not as serious as you think they are. So that's tip number one. Have a little fun with your inner critic. It'll help that inner critic, and it's also good to name that person. And I bet you know what their name is if you're an improver. The second tip is just learn to smile. Smile and breathe and go slowly. Improvers want to get things done and they want it to happen now and they want to be right about it. And so you need to practice some self-compassion. That not everything is going to be perfect. Not everything is going to be up to snuff with the world or with yourself. And so practicing self-compassion is important. And that's important for all of these types, maybe especially for type number one, the improvers. Be compassionate, and smiling and breathing and going slowly will help you to be compassionate with yourself. Activate that compassion. Here's the tip number three, is to activate that compassion for yourself and others by doing this. Find someone that you trust and tell that person how you are struggling that day. Voicing that to someone that you trust will help you experience compassion coming from yourself and hopefully coming from them. That's why you choose someone you trust. So all those things will, if you practice them consistently, will help your inner critic become a little quieter and will help you not stop trying to improve the world and improve yourself. We need that in you, but to do it in a way that is full of compassion and that has patience. Type number two are known as helpers. Helpers have this incredible ability to know what people's needs are, not just because they've asked them, but because they can sense them. They'll walk into a room and they will know immediately who is in need of a listening ear or maybe some financial help or physical help. They're very highly attuned to what people's needs are. But interesting enough, they're often not able to ask for help themselves. So in a stressful time, when twos aren't their best selves, they will they can try to gain approval, and they can be kind of calculating with with how they give service and help. They want to because they want to gain some support for themselves, but they don't want to ask for it. They want people to do for them what they can do for others, which is to intuit what their needs are. And this can get twos in a lot of trouble, just like all of our default behaviors and stress can get each one of us in trouble, no matter what our numbers are. So some tips for how to handle a stressful time if you're a two, or if you think you're a two, or if you know and love a two. First one of those tips would be to respect others' boundaries with your help. Not everybody wants to be helped. Not everybody asks for help. Not everybody wants to have them put your arm around them. That not everybody is asking for this, and so you need to respect people's boundaries for what help you give them. The second is when you feel an urge to help, stop for a second and ask yourself, what is that urge about? Is it something that's a selfless urge? Or is there kind of a strategy in it? Do you want to be seen as a helper? Do you somehow wish that others would help you in those ways? So stop and ask yourself, what's motivating my desire to help? A third tip is to practice, and this is probably the hardest thing for twos, is to practice telling others what you need. Don't just allow or don't expect them to intuit what you need. You need to tell them, this is what I need from you. And don't do something nice, hoping that they will do something nice back to you. You need to be honest and forthright, and that's going to take practice to do that. That's why we call it a practice. You're not going to get it right. It's not going to feel comfortable. So you need to practice doing that. And then a fourth tip would be is spend some time in solitude, because twos are so their reference is other people. You need to spend some time in solitude every day. Uh, and here's when this is going to sound not Christian, but you need to focus on yourself, not on other people's needs, but on your own needs. Be honest with yourself about them. Be honest with God about them. But spend some time with just yourself and God, focusing on yourself. So that's type number 3 is known as the performers. And like type 2, they can be very tuned in to people's feelings. They have an ability when they go in the room to kind of read the temperature of the room, to know what the emotions are there. Another thing about performers, who they are, is that they are the people who get things done. And there's not an organization or a church that doesn't need threes. People who will grab a task, take some initiative, marshal whatever resources are needed, and then just get the job done. They're indispensable to any organization. So they're very aware of emotions in others, but interestingly enough, they're less so aware of their own emotions, and so they can use other people's emotions to understand reality, but then they won't kind of enter into that reality with their own emotions. Instead, and this is what happens in stress with type threes, is that they can be pretty emotionally detached from the situation, and and the more stressed out and the more unhealthy a 3 is, the more hyper focused they can be on productivity, on hitting goals, on getting things done. And so, for 3s, here's some tips for how to get through stressful times. Is that you need to recognize that others are handling this period of our communal life differently. They're not as adaptive. 3s are very adaptive. They know what kind of person to be in what situation, kind of what is needed of them to help within a group. So you're very adaptive. Recognize that others aren't as adaptive as you are, and so. And so instead of valuing their productivity, their ability to get things done in these different times, is you need to learn to value them as people first and foremost. So if you're a 3 and you're at work, that means that you need to schedule some some non-goal time into your activities. And so it's not all about getting things done, but have some time to focus on other people. At work, there's water cooler time, which is an important piece of the work organization. If you're working at home, you don't have that. You're It kind of plays into your tendency to just be hyper focused on accomplishing things. And so you might need to plan into your day activities which are non goal oriented. And then the third tip is to share your fears and your vulnerability with people. Threes, and I love this phrase, I think it's very helpful and very succinct, is that threes can be very personable, meaning that they can talk to anyone, they can have a conversation with anyone, they can be whatever that situation needs. They can be very personable, but they might not always be personal, may not always be vulnerable. And not just transparent, but vulnerable, actually sharing something that touches the fear within you. That's a practice to learn during these times of stress when your tendency would be to hold back, to not share those things, because those things, they don't help you get things done. But this time, if you want to value people and not just productivity, is take some time just to share with people, those you love and trust. What are your fears? What makes you feel vulnerable during this time? Thanks for watching this video on the Enneagram types 1 through 3 and how they deal with stress, or how some tips about how to handle the stress of this coronavirus shutdown. If you're interested in hearing about the other 6 types, or maybe you didn't recognize yourself in the types we did in this video, I encourage you to watch the other 2 videos, that you might get some tips on how to be your best self, your most compassionate self, to become the person that God has made you to be. Blessings to you during this time, that you might follow Christ, that you might discover who God is making you to be.